funny thing happens to the time travelers on their way to Heathrow Airport.
Is that supposed to be Heathrow?
It is. Well, actually, they haven't built the airport yet. We're about 300 years early.
It's 1666, the year of the Great Fire of London.
What's this sort of atmosphere? Stifling.
Or someone who needs it to breathe properly.
Reptile monsters plan to spread a deadly plague in the Visitation, Saturday and Thursday at 7 on Doctor Who. Join us Fridays at 7 for the daring exploits of Dick Turpin, the legendary highwayman, and his partner Swiftnick, as they try to elude the evil Sheriff Glutton.
Rid the county of this symbol of anarchy, Nathan, and you could rise. You could rise.
Dick Turpin Rides Again, Fridays at 7 on TV Ontario. This is TV Ontario.
The Middle East. الشرق الأوسط. המזרח התיכון. خاور میانه. ارتداد. If our world sometimes seems to be tearing itself apart, with conflict between north and south, east and west, rich and poor, many of these conflicts would appear to come to a head in the Middle East. It's like a microcosm of all the world's problems. But why? Why does there always seem to be so much trouble in the Middle East? This is the question that we're going to try to answer in this series of programs. Hardly a day goes by without some news report from the Middle East. Fighting between the Arabs and the Israelis, civil war in Lebanon, religious revolution in Iran, the oil crisis involving Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf. But all of this information is presented to us in a vacuum, out of context. Who are all these strange people in the Middle East? Where do they come from? Where are they going? What makes them tick? Well, of course, like all of us, they've been molded by their history and their culture. So in each of our programs, we'll focus on a different element in the background of the Middle Easterners that shapes the way they behave. To a certain extent, we'll be looking at the whole of the Middle East in every program, but each time from a different point of view. By the time we get to the end of the series, we should have a lot of the necessary background against which to evaluate what's going on in the Middle East. First of all, how do we define the Middle East? Well, the heartland of the region is at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. It includes Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, Syria, Egypt, and Iraq. This area is known as the Fertile Crescent, both because it is one of the best agricultural areas in the Middle East and because it is roughly in the shape of a crescent. Extending southwards from the Fertile Crescent is the Arabian Peninsula, which is bordered by the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea, and the Persian Gulf. Most of the Arabian Peninsula is taken up by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with the two Yemens in the southwest corner and Oman in the southeast corner. Along the Persian Gulf, there are 10 other states: Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the 7 tiny countries that make up the United Arab Emirates. To the north and east of the Fertile Crescent, there are 2 other large nations which are also normally considered to be part of the Middle East: Iran and Turkey. In our definition, the Middle East also includes the North African countries of Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. The first important thing to notice about the Middle East is that it is quite literally in the middle, at the junction of 3 continents: Europe, Africa, and Asia. The Arabian Peninsula and Iran are part of Asia. Egypt and the North African countries are part of Africa. And one section of Turkey is in Europe, while the rest of it is in Asia. This has meant that historically, the Middle East has always been a crossroads. To go by land from Europe to Africa, or to China, or India, merchants have always had to go by way of the Middle East. The Silk Road from China used to run through Iran and Turkey, and the spice route from India either came up the Persian Gulf and then across the Syrian desert to the Mediterranean, or it went up by way of the Red Sea and then crossed the Egyptian desert to the Nile. Other trade routes brought ivory and gold and slaves from Africa. In fact, the whole region has been crisscrossed by trade routes from time immemorial. The Middle East is less of a crossroads in terms of trade today, but its central position still gives it great strategic importance to the superpowers. Not to mention the fact that about 70% of all the world's known oil reserves happen to be situated in the Middle East. But the Middle East doesn't form only a geographical bridge between north and south and east and west. It also forms a cultural bridge. Since this region is part European, part Asian, and part African, so are its inhabitants. This is why we see such a mixture of different physical types in the Middle East, where there is more racial and cultural diversity than perhaps anywhere else in the world. In many ways, the Middle Easterners are middlemen. They are cultural brokers who form a link, not only between 3 continents, but also between the ancient and modern, between the oldest ways of doing things and some of the newest ways. So today the Middle Easterners are standing at the intersection not only of North and South and East and West, but also of the Bronze Age and the Computer Age. But given the tremendous diversity of these middlemen, how do we sort them out? What sort of pattern can we find in this cultural mosaic? Well, to start with, there's a religious pattern. Apart from a few pockets of Christianity, mainly in Lebanon and Egypt, and of course of Judaism in Israel, the religion of almost the whole of the Middle East is Islam. Although Islam actually extends much further afield than this. In fact, there are many more Muslims outside the Middle East than inside. But since Islam started in the Middle East, this is still the center of the Islamic world. So once again, in terms of Islam at any rate, the Middle Easterners are in the middle. About 95% of the people in the Middle East are Muslims. But knowing this still doesn't help us make much sense of the tremendous variety of different Middle Easterners until we look at them from a political point of view and see that there are four major peoples who stand out: the Arabs, the Turks, the Iranians, and the Jews. Out of the 26 nation-states that make up the Middle East, one is Turkish, Turkey itself. One is Iranian, Iran. One is Jewish, Israel. And the other 23 states are all Arab. As far as we know, the Arabs and the Jews have always been in the Middle East. They originated right in the center of the region. There have been Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula and the Fertile Crescent for at least 3,000 years. And for the last 1,300 years or so, they have also been settled in North Africa. As for the Jews, or the Hebrews as they used to be called, for the first 2,000 years of their history, they also lived in various parts of the Fertile Crescent, especially in the biblical kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And then for the next 1,800 years or so, most of them were dispersed to carry on their Jewish way of life in other parts of the world. Until about 100 years ago, when they started to move back into the Middle East in increasing numbers to settle in this region, which was to become the modern state of Israel. There are now about 140 million Arabs in the Middle East, and about 3.5 million Jews living in Israel. Israel itself is a Middle East in miniature, a mixture of East and West, of Europe and Asia and Africa. 60% of the Israeli Jews are native Middle Easterners. And 40% of the Jews in Israel are descendants of people who had spent the last 1,000 years or so living in Europe. And of course, in addition to the Jews, there are also about 500,000 Arabs living in Israel. This mixture of Arabs and Jews in the Middle East has proved to be a very explosive one in modern times, and has led to bitter conflict, not only between Israel and the Arab states, but also within Israel itself. There's a sad irony to all this, since for nearly all of their previous history, the Jews and the Arabs had gotten along pretty well together. And why not? After all, they have so much in common. Both originally came from the same place, the heartland of the Middle East, and both are what are known as Semitic peoples. Now, this word Semitic has been misused for so long that I should take some time to explain it. Strictly speaking, it has nothing to do with race, nothing to do with the physical makeup of the Arabs or the Jews. It's a linguistic term, and it was taken originally from the Bible. Noah had 3 sons. After the flood, the ancient world was said to be divided up among them. Shem got the Middle East, Ham got Africa, and Japheth got Asia. So linguists in the 19th century started to use the words Semitic, Hamitic, and Japhetic for some of the languages of these areas. But nowadays, only the term Semitic is widely used, and the most important surviving Semitic languages are Arabic and Hebrew. These are very closely related. When I count up to 5 in Arabic, we get Wahid, Ithnain, Thalatha, Arba, Khamsa. In Hebrew, Achad, Shnayim, Shlosha, Arba, Khamisha. Very close. Or the greeting, peace be upon you. In Arabic, Assalamu alaikum. Hebrew, Shalom alaikum. In fact, when you hear people talking in the street in the Middle East, it's often very difficult to tell whether they're speaking Arabic or Hebrew. Here is a conversation in Arabic. And here is some Hebrew. So the Arabs and the Jews share the same geographical and linguistic heritage. And according to the Islamic tradition, they also share the same ancestor. Because just as the Jews believe that they are descended from Abraham via his son Isaac, so Muslims believe that the Arabs are descended from Abraham via his son Ishmael. The Arabs and the Jews go back a long way, as does the third major group of people in the Middle East, the Iranians, whom we used to call Persians. In fact, the names Iranian and Persian really become interchangeable. The Iranians are thought to have originated somewhere in Central Asia, but they moved into the Middle East at a very early stage, roughly 3,500 years ago, into the area that is still called Iran today. But at various times in their history, the Iranians have ruled over many other parts of the Middle East. The population of Iran today is about 40 million people. The language of the Iranians is called Persian, and it's quite unrelated to Arabic or Hebrew. If I count up to 5 in Persian, we get Yek, Do, Se, Char, Panj. Very different from the Arabic Wahid, Ithnain, Thalatha, Arba, Khamsa. Persian is not a Semitic language. It's Indo-European. It belongs to the same family as English or German. And some Persian words are very close to English. Brother is brother, mother is mader, daughter is dokhtar.
خود ماشی اومدم تیلو اومدم شهردا از شهردا اومدم تیلو اومدم قوم یه روزم قوم موندیم جاد خالی.
Finally, let's look at the fourth major people in this region, the Turks. Like the Iranians, the Turks also originated in Central Asia, where large numbers of them still live, in China and the Soviet Union. But the Turks moved into the Middle East much later than the Iranians, only about 900 years ago, which is fairly recent on a Middle Eastern timescale. They moved into this area, which we call Turkey today. And in the 15th century, the Turks founded an empire, which ruled over almost the whole of the Middle East, and part of Europe as well, until just after World War I. But since the 1920s, Turkish rule has been confined to the modern Republic of Turkey, where the total Turkish population is now about 45 million people. The Turkish language is neither Indo-European nor Semitic. Instead of counting as the Arabs do, wahid, ithnain, thalatha, arba, khamsa, or like the Persians, yek, do, se, char, panj, the Turks go bir, iki, ich, dört, besh. No relation at all to Arabic, Hebrew, or Persian. This is because Turkish is a Central Asian language. It belongs to the same family as Mongolian.
Bir yalamak bırak da biz de bir yalamayalım. Şuralara geldik, 3-4 gündür şu dağlarda geziyoruz.
So language is one way to distinguish the four major peoples of the Middle East. Their writing system is another. The title of this television series, The Middle East, becomes Asharq al-Awsat in Arabic, and in Hebrew, Hamizrach HaTichon. In Persian, Chavere Miyane, and in Turkish, Orta Doğu. They all sound different, and they all look different, because they use different writing systems, except for the Arabs and the Iranians, who use the same script. Although, as we've seen, they're quite different peoples who speak quite different languages. So even in their languages and their writing systems, the Middle Easterners fall in between our normal ways of categorizing people. The Turks are Asians who speak an Asiatic language, and yet who write this language in a European script. The Iranians are also Asians. But they speak an Indo-European language, which they write in Arabic script. And the Arabs are both Asians and Africans. Who speak a Semitic language that is related to that of the Jews, many of whom are of European descent. The Middle Easterners have always formed a human bridge between the four corners of the world. They've always been middlemen in terms of culture, language, and commerce. This age-old role is rather aptly symbolized in many of the paintings of the three kings who visited the baby Jesus in Bethlehem. The gifts they brought were gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the three most precious commodities of the Middle Eastern merchants of ancient times. And the kings themselves were often depicted as representatives of the three continents which come together in the Middle East. They were shown as a European, an Asian, and an African.
There's still time to enroll in TV Ontario's course on the Middle East for a $29 registration.